give it another couple of minutes before we get started, because I'm mindful that people are moving between Zooms and Teams and whatever else, whatever platform of choice you've got. So we'll just give it another minute or two before we get started. But lovely to see so many people able to join us for a Friday lunchtime. It's not quite wine time for me yet, because I've got some work to do this afternoon. And you know, well done. We've made it to the end of the second week of January. I'll do some intros in a sec. Got a few more people joining. Hopefully you're all having a good week. Niall, we've got Niall here, who's our special guest today. Hi, Niall. Nice to see you.
Hi, guys.
Hi, I'll do the proper intros in a minute, Niall.
No worries.
Nice to see you there.
Such a full house. It's wonderful.
It is, isn't it? Definitely got a few names I recognise. So hello to the people that I've met before, either in person or virtually, as the world is now. Hope everybody's doing okay. Hope you're all surviving, thriving maybe, but at least surviving. What time are we at? I think we should get started, because we've got a lot to get through today, haven't we, guys? So I think we should make a start. We are going to be recording a session today, just to let you know. Bunch of people who will watch us on catch up. So just giving you fair warning that today's session's being recorded. Because we've got quite a few people, it's probably helpful at the moment if you could stick yourselves on mute if you haven't already. Saves us trying to find the person that's not on mute. We will be asking you to unmute later on if you've got some questions, so you'll have the opportunity to unmute and ask us questions later on. So welcome everybody to this lovely lunchtime session today, which is all about resetting your internal comms. My name is Emma Bridger, and I am the founder and MD of People Lab. I'm not going to say too much about People Lab today, but we work with organisations to help them design, create brilliant experiences that result in engagement and all the wonderful outcomes that are associated with that. And obviously internal communication is a key part of the experience at work, and has a key role to play in terms of facilitating engagement. So I'm joined today by my colleague Katie Austin, who's going to be helping this session to run smoothly, and also my colleague Belinda Ganaway. Bea, just want to introduce yourself?
Oh yes, thank you. It's wonderful to be here. Super excited about this session. So as Emma said, my name is Belinda. I'm an employee experience design practitioner. I'm also a team and systems coach and a facilitator. My background's in journalism, comms and culture, which also embraces the whole world of digital transformation.
Thank you, Bea. And I've also got a special guest joining us today, Niall. Give us a wave, Niall. I'm going to introduce Niall properly in a few minutes and get Niall to introduce himself. Niall's currently head of internal comms at the Department of Health and Social Care. I think that's right, isn't it, Niall? Yeah, the departments are often changing, so making sure I get the right terminology. I'll get Niall to intro himself in just a sec. Like so many of us, I'm currently working from home. You can probably tell my office is not this cool. And I've got 3 children at various parts of the house, homeschooling. My youngest is just literally sat opposite me. I have told him to be quiet, but just in case, if you hear someone singing, he often sings while he's doing his work. That's Teddy. So I'll give him a nudge, give him a kick under the table, very gentle kick. So yeah, very informal today. So welcome to this session. I'm blown away by the interest we've had and delighted that you could all join us and make time to be here. I know we're all super busy, so it's wonderful you could be here. Really excited to share with you some thoughts and ideas today. But just by way of, I guess, a little bit of scene setting, I just want to share with you kind of, I suppose, my journey with internal comms and you know, why we set this session up today. I'm just going to turn my emails off so they don't ping in the background. So I, like so many people in internal comms, kind of fell into this world. It's a happy accident, as Bob Ross would say. Back in 1998, which makes me feel very old, but then I suppose I am quite old now, really. I fell into it by accident. I'd just moved to Brighton. My previous life, I was an academic. Someone recently described me as a recovering academic, which I think is quite a good way of phrasing it. And I was a specialist in health psychology, health promotion. So I knew about communication. I lectured in communication, but in a very different field. And I saw this advert for an internal comms manager at what was Seaboard Energy, it's now EDF Energy. I thought, well, that looks really interesting. I might go for that. And to my delight and surprise, I got the job. And I was over the moon to get the role. But back in 1998, I think it's fair to say that internal comms was very much in its infancy. I didn't really have a clue what I was doing when I first fell into the field and had to learn very quickly on the job. And it was around the time Malcolm had just started. The IOIC was called Communicators in Business. So we were all kind of learning together, I guess. And what really blew me away about finding myself in this wonderful world of internal comms was the people that I got to work with and network with. And I remember going to my first conference in London not long after I started. I met this brilliant group of people from all these kind of diverse backgrounds. There were journalists, there were PAs, there were people like me that just kind of fallen into it. And we're all kind of learning together, I guess. And I think that's very much kind of still the case, that the community of internal communicators is very generous and very, very giving. And there's lots of very passionate people involved. And people that really care about, what it is we do in internal comms and having an impact on the business. But I think why we set the webinar up today was that, over the years, I worked 10 years in-house as an internal communicator for various organizations, and then moved to consultancy side. But what's struck me more and more over the past few years is that very often we're still having the same conversation. It doesn't feel like it's moved on in a way that I believe it could move on. When I first started in internal comms, we had remote workers back then. We talked about remote workers. We talked about how do we reach these difficult to reach remote workers. That was a thing, 20 plus years ago. Digital was a thing, for people that have been in the practice as long as I have, many of us were involved in the first wave of intranet. So we had intranets coming in and things were starting to be kind of digitized even back then. So we looked at kind of, what's the role of digital? How can we use digital? We talked about having an impact. How do we measure what we do? How do we prove our worth? How do we demonstrate return on investment? We talked about, having a seat at the table. How do we really professionalize what we're doing? How do we get taken seriously? So those are the conversations that I was having, back then. And I think they're the conversations that I still see people having now. And there's nothing wrong with those conversations. But for me, there's a huge opportunity to really evolve and revolutionize the way we do internal comms. And I think what internal comms has always been really great at is learning from other disciplines. So we have a bit of psychology in there, we have some research and metrics in there, we have marketing in there, we have, people practice in there, we have all sorts of different disciplines. And what we're great at is kind of begging and borrowing and stealing those different disciplines. And what we want to talk to you about today is the journey that we've been on, and myself, Katie, Belinda, and other people, in terms of kind of really formalizing some tools from the world of positive psychology, my background psychology, and more specifically today, the world of design thinking and human-centered design. And we feel that these sorts of tools, this approach to internal comms has got the potential to be a real game changer. Because what I would love to see in the future are conferences with quite a different agenda, asking different questions, really elevating the conversation. So we're not feeling like Groundhog Day, like, are we still talking about this stuff, guys? And you think about, the world of marketing, how that's changed beyond all recognition from 20 years ago. And I want to see the same. That's my desire, my passion is to see the same for internal comms. And I know we can do it because I think, the sorts of people that get involved in internal comms are absolutely, some of the best people I've ever worked with. So that's kind of the scene setter, I guess. Hopefully that makes sense. If while I'm talking, you want to stick comments or views or anything in the chat, please do, because we'd love to hear from you. So that's kind of where we're at, really. And today was just a kind of an idea we kicked around, which is why I've invited Niall, because I sort of talked to Niall about this. It would be great to have him along to sort of share his thoughts. around actually, I wonder if other people are having the same sort of conversations that we're having. And the answer is absolutely yes, because we've had this phenomenal interest in the session today. So today is all about, I guess, just starting the conversation with you. And what Belinda and I wanted to do was to share with you some of the work that we've been doing over the past few years with organisations that we thought you might be interested in and might help you. So that's kind of the scene setter. So what I'd love to do is I'm going to come to you, Niall, because as I said, you know, Niall is someone that I've had some great conversations with about this topic over the past few months. And I know that Niall, you've got some really interesting views and a really interesting background actually in terms of where you've come from and why we're kind of on the same page. So I'm gonna shut up now and hand over to Niall. So Niall, do you want to start by just giving us a little bit of an intro in terms of your background and some thoughts on kind of the scene that I've just set?
Sure. Thank you, Emma. And my colleague Sarah is on the call as well. So hopefully she'll recognize the person that I'm going to start talking about in relation to myself. I fell into comms as well, probably about 15, 16 years ago. And actually it was as a result of a change program in an organization, which literally changed everything, systems, purpose, values, and it did it all at the same time. And looking back on it, what they had developed and delivered, which now has a name, was an employee experience that was transformational for me. And it made me think about myself as a manager and how I could be a more effective leader, etc. And it was that prompted me to want to be in the comms and engagement space. And what shaped the comms and engagement that I delivered was the first role that I took on, which was with a luxury retailer, where it was with an organization which, and Charterhouse rules here, etc., didn't care about its employees, didn't really want to listen to its employees. And if it wanted to talk to employees, it was more about to tell them what they should be doing, how they should be doing it, and consequences if there wasn't compliance. So for me, my first comms role was try to create an environment of comms and engagement where I was basically an ambassador for employees within the organization, where the top tier didn't really have an interest in those employees. And that sort of shaped my journey, where I now have a background in internal comms, employee engagement, the insight in particular, so not just activities, but true insight. Throughout my career, that's evolved into taking on other aspects of employer brand, employee value proposition, change management, and more laterally in my career, really touching into employee experience design and how that can shape the communications environment, as well as just change the environment for employees within an organization. So that's sort of a snapshot of my background. And I've worked for a variety of different organizations like luxury retailers, finance, and I'm in the Department of Health and Social Care at the moment. So I end up in very unique situations with organizations going through quite pivotal changes within their organization. Just thinking about the employee experience sort of narrative to this and how it shaped what I do within internal comms, or what I try to achieve within organizations, and picking up on a point, particularly Emily, that you said about where sometimes we borrow from others, etc., but actually there's others that we can learn from. And it's when I was working within retail, I had a very inspirational experience with a chief marketing officer who was talking about how they were connecting with the customer, and not just through marketing and campaigns, etc., but they were using that to help gain insight into actually how the brand needed to deliver its service and its product proposition to the customers. And it was quite an immersive experience where customers were part of that journey as well. And it did make me think about actually how could I play a role in creating experiences for employees using the levers of internal communications and engagement. And throughout my career, not alone have I worked with colleagues in marketing, especially in that sort of customer insight, research, behavior, but also I've led the engagement research myself. So with my colleagues in HR, etc., trying to understand what are the drivers and levers of people's behavior to drive them to perform better within organizations. But also I've worked with teams such like UX teams within IT and in the web development teams as well, all of which I've used, sort of stolen their knowledge to help me improve what I do within my role. I don't want to waffle on forever and a day.
I'm muting. Thank you, Niall. That's a really interesting kind of insight into your journey, I suppose, and really interesting to hear kind of, you know, some of the inspiration that you've had along the way. And I think just before we kind of get into sort of sharing the framework we're going to share with you and the tools and ideas we've got, I think something that really resonates with me is this piece around, you know, learning from other disciplines and not getting left behind. So something that I talk about a lot, and apologies if you've heard me talk before, you might have heard me kind of, you know, talk about this, but you know, currently, you know, I can look on Spotify. I'm a Spotify user, and Spotify can tell me what I was listening to like 20 years ago, and it can recommend stuff for me, and it's pretty spot on. And Netflix will tell me what sort of stuff that it thinks I might want to watch, and Amazon, etc. And, you know, we're in an age of hyper personalization, and marketing has just kind of absolutely led the way with that. And yet in organizations, we know from the Gatehouse State of the Sector research that very few internal communicators are even using personas, and personas are only kind of the first step in personalization. It's not even where we could be. Imagine where we could be if we started using kind of more hyper personalization like marketing does. But have you got any views on why you think, you know, internal comms is in danger of getting left behind as a discipline?
Well, if I think back about what drove and still drives my focus on the purpose of internal comms, is that when I started out my career, it was very much about being a voice for employees within the organization. And when I was in that space, I truly got to understand what makes employees connect to an organization and what disconnects them from an organization. And also in terms of actually on a day-to-day basis, employees want to be able to do the job that they're employed to do. And what I found in my early career is that I was really close to those conversations where I could see where the organization wasn't working for employees, where it's an expression I use, where the organization gets in the way of the very people it's employed to be able to deliver the product or services, etc., for its customers. So, and I think because of how that lens, it's really shaped a very different approach for me, whereas I've come into other organizations at later stages of my career where the starting point is around strategy and purpose and values, etc. And that's a great place to be as well. But I think that if I think about today's world and I think about the humans that are employed within organizations, if I just hold up my phone is the most powerful tool I have. And it's probably more powerful than a lot of the systems that are within my organization. And I can tailor this tool to meet my needs. I can use it to learn about the organization that I work for. I can use it to learn about ways of doing things, whatever that may be. There's so much within my power as an individual. And I think that we forget that employees, when they come into an organization, they are more than just an employee, that actually an organization, especially today, and I think even this 2020, I think is going to create an even more significant shift where employees are thinking about themselves, and we use it's an expression that's used a lot. How do we bring the whole of ourselves to the workplace? I don't even know if it's about just the whole of ourselves to the workplace. It's just how can we be the whole of ourselves, where work is a part of that, but there's other parts of my life that are just as equal, just as important, if not more important. And when I think about internal comms, the landscape is that there are people who were fighting for their attention. And how do we cut through? And I guess the thing for me is how do we create experiences within the organization which can have personal value for employees? You know, we talk about, you know, let's say values, for example. You know, I'm always in a sort of a dilemma about values, because I think the most important values that exist are my values. If an organization has values, If they resonate with mine, that's great. But I'm not going to connect with them if my experience inside an organization, through the conversations I have with people, through the tools that I have to use, through the expectations I have to meet for a customer, etc., for how I'm recognized for that, if all of that doesn't seem evident in the world around me in terms of what I'm actually experiencing, then those values don't mean anything to me whatsoever. And for me, I think, well, I am always mindful of that as an internal communicator, that my role isn't to communicate, strategy and values, etc., and just go, oh, great, we've done that, etc. I always go one step further, and I think internal communicators, I'm sure there's a lot who do this. I think that's the effort going forward, is actually, what does this look like when we think about the think, feel, and do? We reach out to the furthest point and we think, how can they do this? Can they do this? What's in the way of them being able to do the very best within their role that aligns to the organizational needs, whilst also aligning to their needs as individuals?
Thanks for that, Niall. Yeah, something that really resonates in terms of what you talked about, lots of things, but a couple of things I want to pick up on is the widening gap between the communication experience we have outside of work, which is really slick these days, isn't it? Yeah, there's lots of issues with it, fake news, for example, but we can kind of get our hands on anything and whatever we want any time of day. We've got often a great comms experience outside of work, and inside of work, it seems to be the gap is widening, and I don't think it has to be that way, which brings us beautifully into what we want to talk about today. So the other word you talked about there, Niall, was human. And we're going to talk about using human-centered design and design thinking to really, change the game when it comes to internal communication. A little bit of expectation management, I guess. There's nothing new in the world, and I think often you talk about kind of this different way of doing things, and you go along to these webinars and go, oh, it's going to be something I've never heard of before. And the kind of spoiler alert is a lot of what we're going to talk about today is probably elements of it you will have come across, elements of it you've probably already using. But what we want to do is try to kind of bring it together in a single framework and approach to kind of just spark some ideas and thinking really as to how you can use the best of positive psychology and a human-centered design approach to really change the way you approach internal comms. So on that note, I'm going to come over to you, B. I'm sure you've got lots of thoughts on that, and I'm going to bring up some slides just to share with you some of the tools and models we've been using for the last few years with clients and really had some amazing impact with. So I'm just going to pull the slides up and just ask for a couple of initial thoughts from you, B, on what we talked about so far.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's such a fair comment, in that actually, if you've got a group of internal communicators together in a room and ask them if they were using design thinking, they might say no. Then you start talking about what design thinking is, and you get some, oh yeah, we do that. So as you say, I think it's about bringing some of this together and hopefully encouraging to push the boundaries. I think there is a risk with design thinking, and I will go back and define it for you. There is a risk with design thinking that it gets reduced to a workshop with post-it notes. So I'm not saying it's not an interesting place to start. There's nothing wrong with a workshop with post-it notes, but actually it has so much more than that. So design thinking is a framework and an approach. It's a set of tools, i.e. the workshop and the post-it notes, but it's also a mindset. And I think this mindset is really defined, if you like, by three key things. It's about empathy, curiosity, and experimentation. And I think that's where design thinking can, if you know a little bit more about it and you embrace it a little bit more fully, it takes you to a slightly different place. So I think most internal communicators are going to really confidently and correctly say they start with the human need. They start with the employee. What does the employee need? And that's great. But I think what design thinking does, it gives you this mindset and a set of tools to go deeper into that. It's the difference between looking at data versus actually having a conversation with the people that you're trying to connect with, to influence, to support. So I like to think of dialogue over data as the starting point. So for me, I'll just give you a quick definition in case we forget to come back to it and you're left reeling with what even is design thinking. So a framework and an approach, a set of tools and a mindset. So IDEO's Tim Brown, who was some of the design thinking goes back before IDEO grabbed hold of it. They popularized it and they're great. But Tim Brown talks about it as being a human-centered approach to innovation that draws from the designer's toolkit, that's the designer bit, to integrate or to bring together or to keep in balance, if you like, the needs of three things: people, the possibilities of technology, and the requirements of business success. Now, when Emma and I work together using design thinking, we slightly reframe those three things. So we talk about the needs of people, the needs of the work, and the needs of the organization. So that's where we come to. And so just to summarize, there's a lot of words associated with design thinking, and it can easily become quite big and amorphous and difficult to grab hold of. So let me boil it down to, I'm going to borrow from Tim Brown again. He summarizes design thinking as about inspiration, ideation, and implementation. So this is the three lenses model. As I said, we reframe those three constraints slightly to really put the human need or the human being at the center of all of our thinking and planning and doing, and balancing these three lenses of what does the organization need, what's required by the work, and of course, what do the people need. Emma, did that answer your question?
It's just a really simple shift. And you know, the greatest thing, the simplest things, but a really simple shift really is for me about starting with the end user. And I know, you know, we talk about this in internal comms, but I'm going to challenge you to say how many of us really do this. You know, for starters, you know, most organizations don't even have a set of personas, let alone any further kind of insights to personalize. So often, you know, when designing communication campaigns or strategies, the starting point will often be, what does the organization need or want? What does the chief executive need or want? What do we need to operationally let people know about for the work or the customer? We very, very rarely start by saying, what are the needs, expectations, and motivations of our people? What is it they need and want? What's going to help them? What's going to do it for them? And I think that in itself, you know, has got the potential to be a real game changer. And like I say, this isn't a superficial thing. This is a very, very deep part of the process we're going to talk about. So it's not just oh yeah, I kind of know that person over there might prefer an email or might prefer a phone call. We're not talking about that. We're talking about really deep insight into genuinely understanding the people that we're designing communication for, and what's going to work for them. So that's kind of the starting point really. And I say it's very simple. It's not particularly groundbreaking, but has a huge impact on the success that you then have with the communication experiences you're designing. So this is kind of the headline really. This is our IC by design framework. And again, for those of you that are involved in, you know, design thinking, human-centered design, you know, this won't be particularly new for you. But what we have done is, over the course of the last few years, working with brilliant clients and kind of ideating and prototyping with them, is we've refined the kind of tools and activities and approaches that sit underneath these kind of key milestones, if you like, to really help to use the best of design thinking and positive psychology to kind of impact with internal comms in quite a different and more profound way. So B, do you want to talk through this kind of triple diamond model? This is kind of our overall framework for IC by design.
Thank you. Yeah, so as I said, you know, for us, it's about IC by design is made up of two components. It's a framework, a way of doing things, and a mindset. So this sort of encapsulates both, if you like. So there is, as Emma said, we've not invented anything new, particularly we've sort of like incorporated and adapted this in a way that makes most sense. So a lot of you'll be really familiar with the double diamond approach of how the Design Council encapsulated the design approach that most designers take. Now, in design thinking, there's always this sort of upfront bit, which is almost like deciding what you're going to work on. What we've done here is we've sort of just expanded out the double diamonds to give it a third diamond, which we call the scoping phase, which is really the kind of like the strategy, the big picture bit, if you like. So you've got this strategy or big picture bit up front, which is kind of like, what's our approach? What are we trying to achieve? Where do we focus and why? all the usual sort of strategic planning bits that you would be thinking about. And then there's the what's sometimes called the problem space, because of the positive psychology that we like to bring to it. We talk about this, the opportunity space. This is when we look in detail at specific things that we'd like to make better, or put it more precisely, that the people in our organization, our employees, the employees in the organization would like us to make better. What can we do that will enhance the experience that people have of internal communications in the organization? And then there's the solution space, which is actually what are the things that we need to do as a result of that. So just to recap, the first one, scope, is the big picture stuff. In the middle is when we learn a lot more about the thing that we want to solve. And the reason it goes narrow and sorry, broad and then narrow is because it reflects the thinking that we're doing at that time. So when it goes broad, we're collecting new information, lots of new information, not just from surveys, but from hanging out with our people. When it goes narrow, we're actually redefining what the thing is that we need to do, but not through the lens of the organization, through the lens or through the eyes of the people that we're creating stuff for. And the last diamond, the solution space, is when we start to come up with solutions. But what's really brilliant about design thinking is that we don't come up with a single solution that might take us 6 months to build and spec and create lots of PowerPoints and go to lots of meetings about. We very quickly come up with a broad range of solutions, and we start to test and iterate those solutions. So it's like taking baby steps forward and quickly starting to shift the dial on things rather than spending months and months and months in planning. And again, so you discover more about your ideas by testing and iterating them before you actually land on a final solution or solutions. So that's the framework. One key thing to say is, as with all design thinking, it's not meant to be prescriptive. It's a thinking tool. It's meant to be a guide to illustrate and remind you to check in with what you're doing at any given time and what thinking mode you're in. So it's iterative. You might go forwards as well as backwards.
Thanks, B. So what we're going to do, because obviously we've only got, not half an hour left together today, we haven't got time to go into this in loads of detail, but we just pulled out a few examples of models and approaches we use that sit underneath these different areas. And we'll try and bring some of them to life with some examples from real life clients. Obviously, you've got to anonymize stuff, but we'll try and give you some examples to bring some of this to life in terms of the difference that this makes. So we wanted to start by sharing our life spiral model. I'm sure you've all heard of the life cycle. It's definitely having a moment at the moment. We like to talk about a life spiral instead, because we don't see the employee life within organizations having a kind of definitive beginning and an end. It's ongoing. Even you might leave and come back, or you might leave and talk positively about the organization. And we think there are a number of opportunities for internal comms to positively impact the experience our people have, obviously, stating the obvious here, with an organization. But the difference, hopefully you've picked this up already, with our approach and the kind of classic life cycle. The classic life cycle sort of talks about, attraction, recruitment, onboarding, performance management, internal comms comes in there. What we've got here is really kind of positioning this through the lens of our people. So rather than saying we want to attract people, we want to keep them, we want to communicate with them, we're saying actually what do our people want? Just illustrations there. So our employees might be saying, I'm thinking about getting a new job. Should I go work for that organization? Or I want to develop and grow, or I want to change. What is the experience from their point of view? So it's just a really subtle shift, but really helps you to start bringing to life the principle of empathy that B talked about, which is kind of one of our core principles for having a different and much bigger impact with the work that we do. B, have you got anything else you'd like to add just to kind of bring that one to life?
Yeah, it's just a really subtle shift of focus from what the organization is doing to what the individual is doing and what they need to enable that. So we can talk a long time about how to use these. We don't have all the time in the world to do it. But for me, this is a tool that we would use in that upfront big picture stage. So this is a great conversation starter around strategy and planning. So that's where I would typically use it. We might use it in different bits of the process as well, but it's a great conversation starter to start to think about comms in the bigger context of employee experience.
Cool, thank you. And you've probably heard of journey mapping as a key tool that's used in employee experience. And we find it works really, really well to use journey mapping for internal comms. And we've used journey mapping as a tool with lots of clients. Thinking, feeling, doing. Niall mentioned that earlier on. It's a classic kind of IC question. What do you want people to think, feel, do? And we find that journey mapping is a really great kind of, again, thinking tool to help comms teams, you know, consider the end-to-end communication experience that we want our people to have. Again, this could be at a strategic level. It could be from kind of like, let's think about the whole. Let's think about all of the kind of touch points that our people have from joining to leaving, and what's that overall communication experience need to look like, and let's map that journey. Or it could be at the kind of a campaign level. We're launching some new values. What does that communication experience and journey look like? So going from awareness to understanding to engagement, buying, commitment, etc. So you can use it at a number of different levels, but it's a really good thinking tool to help you map out that ideal internal comms journey. So just kind of share that to bring that to life a little bit. And what we can do is, you know, we can look at the kind of the current versus the ideal. Where are we at the moment? What needs to change? Or we can use it as a planning tool to say, what do we need to do to bring this to life in the way we want it to be brought to life? So a really useful tool that we've borrowed from the world of kind of human-centered design and customer experience, actually, and latterly employee experience. We said, actually, this works really well for designing a great communication experience too. But yeah, anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, just to add to that, one of the magic powers of this tool is its collaborative potential. What I mean by that is if you need to bring this new way of doing things to light to your stakeholders, even to your leaders, get them in a room, or virtually, you can use any whiteboarding platform, obviously, to do this with some employees and look at the experience collectively as a whole. And suddenly it starts to switch on lights for people, particularly for journeys that aren't owned by different bits of the journeys are owned by different people. So take, for instance, potentially the return to work or return to hybrid working when people are working partly remotely, etc., etc. That is going to involve so many different people, and you need to all get together to actually think about that in a really holistic way. So doing that collaboratively around the focus of a journey map could be a really, really useful way to go.
Yeah, and this is really coming to life for us at the moment with clients I'm working with on that return to the office journey, or return from furlough, or return to this new hybrid way of working. And there are lots of conversations around what, you know, it's so new, right? We haven't done this before. How do we do it in the best way possible? How do we design that experience? And clearly there's a key role for communicators in there, but there's also lots of other kind of stakeholders will be involved in that. So it's working really well as a live example in that scenario. Moments that matter, again, I'm sure that you've heard this as a phrase, and we think this translates really well as a really useful thinking tool when it comes to designing brilliant communication experiences. So B, do you want to bring to life the kind of the moments that matter and how we apply that in internal comms?
Yeah, I think moments that matter obviously are both positive and negative. So the experience somebody has of them can be positive and negative. And they can, on the next slide, we'll talk about a little about the different sorts of moments that matter. But what I think is really interesting about moments that matter is they have a really powerful ability to overcome the limitations of employee surveys, because they remove the inbuilt biases of traditional surveys, because you're asking people what matters to them. And there's lots of different ways of exploring this, whether you're exploring on that holistic level or whether you're exploring it at different bits of a journey. So even things like card sorts are a great way for people to be able to express what really matters, what the particular moments in that matter in that journey really matter to them. Moments that matter also, they unlock something really different. I guess also they can be quite challenging for some organizations because they really deal with emotions. This is where you really get into that emotional territory that might feel quite alien to some organizations, but actually it's when you have those sorts of conversations that you start to unlock something potentially really quite transformational. And they're also a fantastic way of focusing minds on what really matters to people, not what internal comms or HR or even organizational leaders actually think matters, but what really matters to employees. Yeah, and as I said, different types of moments that matter. Because again, like all of this stuff, it can get overwhelming quite quickly if you think of every single moment. So having a way of categorizing them can be quite useful. So specific moments, first day of work, birth of a child, return to work after furlough, ongoing moments. So things like manager check-ins are obviously a key element of the experience that somebody has in an organization. Also creative moments. And I think a lot of organizations, a lot of comms folk we speak to are in the business of creating new moments that matter right now or in the last few months. So virtual town halls, new virtual events, other things that would have happened that now need to be turned virtual. Those are all really ripe territory for thinking about moments that matter and using this sort of dialogue to explore them. And one other thought to leave with you is broken moments, things that should be simple and should work but simply aren't. For instance, logging on to whatever platform you have, but things that just should be right but just aren't somehow as smooth as they should be. Those can quickly, with repetition, ladder up into a moment that matter that you might need to give some attention to.
Cool, thanks. And I'm mindful of time, so I'm going to try and get a bit of a move on. We said we talk about personas. This is, I guess, one of the areas that's got a really obvious application to internal comms, and many of you might already be using personas. It sits in that kind of that middle diamond of the framework. This is really a tool to help us genuinely empathize with the people that we're designing communication for, which is our audience, our end user. Now, in an ideal world, clearly we'd be in the role of, in the world of hyper-personalization, but we're not there yet in internal comms, I don't think. If you are, tell me. I'd love to hear your case study, but I haven't found any company that's using that kind of level of personalization yet with employees. So personas are a next best step, and personas aren't about stereotyping or generalizing. They're about genuinely helping you to put yourself in the shoes of the people you're designing for. And it's a really good first step to do that. And I'm not going to go into too much detail because I've got a little bit of info on the slides here, and we'll send you these slides afterwards. But it's really about using kind of insights and data that you have to genuinely kind of bring to life your audience, so you can start to think about how things are going to land and be experienced and etc. from their point of view. So I won't read through the slides because you can read through that yourselves, but there's a great many ways you can develop personas, and they can be really kind of high level and very much designed for internal comms. They can be much more in depth, but the point is they're there to help you empathize. That's the key role. So I've got some examples here from a client who worked with us, anonymized them, and this was kind of based on, a big piece of insight we ran with them, and we kind of were able to kind of look at the different sorts of needs that different parts of their audience have. So, there's the involve me, there's the just let me listen. You'll probably recognize some of these people in your own organization. So I'm not going to go into these in detail. We're going to send you this afterwards so you'll be able to read through. But, just brings to life, if you're in internal comms and you're thinking about designing a communication experience or creating a moment, having something like this that's simple and easy to use can really help you, elevate what you're doing and really help you to think, is this going to work for this person? Where are they coming from? What's going to work for them? So just to kind of bring it to life a little bit. So I've got a couple of these we'll share with you in the slides afterwards. It's really about making it work for you. So again, these are some anonymized personas for another client we've been working with. These are much more in depth, much more kind of data and insight was used to develop these. But they are there very much the thinking tool to help you design for the end user. What I'd say is that you don't just develop personas and leave them to gather dust on a shelf. You then use them. And a great tool to help you use your persona is what's called an empathy map. So that's taking your persona, what we know about this person, then applying it to a real life opportunity or problem. And when you do that, you look at, okay, so when thinking about, let's say it's a return to work after being furloughed. For this person, you use the empathy map and you say, what are they hearing? What are they thinking? What are they feeling? What are their pains? What are their gains? And it helps you to kind of really target the particular opportunity or problem you're trying to solve. So you wouldn't just leave the personas on the shelf, you would use them with an empathy map tool. So it's a really simple tool to do that. And it inspires what we call user stories. So we're in the world of storytelling as communicators. So we use this to develop what we call a user story, which is kind of from the mouth of the people we're designing for. How is it really for them? And got an example of a very recent live empathy map that we completed anonymized with a client. Just one example of using a persona to apply it to a real life problem using a kind of virtual collaboration tool. B, have you got anything to add to that before I kind of move us on and ask people if they've got questions.
No, great job. I think just two things. Yeah. Two watch outs. Beware a crazy persona pool party where you end up with too many personas. And that's a very common issue. We can go into more detail another time about how to avoid that, but be aware that that does happen and we do have solutions for it. And also, as you said, beware the persona graveyard. So if you're going to invest in creating them, don't leave them on a shelf, bring them out and play with them.
Cool, thanks. And just really quickly, just before I kind of ask you guys if you've got any questions, I'm going to fly through this really, really quickly. But the last diamond that we talked about was the kind of the solution space. And again, we're in the kind of the field of being creative and innovative when it comes to internal comms, and we have to change the way we do things. And again, we can beg, borrow, and steal so many fantastic ideation tools from the world of user experience design thinking to really help us not keep doing the same thing over again and keep getting stuck into a bit of a rut, really. And ideation, we've got lots of great ideation tools that we use with clients, but I suppose just the headline is the purpose is to not get kind of stuck with one idea, to keep a real sort of open mind and divergent way of thinking. Say, what are all the possibilities, what are all the different things we can do? Let's kind of get really creative about that. And again, I think this is probably a space that more teams will feel comfortable in, because we do a lot of this anyway in internal comms. So lots of different ideas as to how we can ideate and come up with as many ideas as possible. And then prototyping, again, we love prototyping. It's really about pulling something together that helps you communicate an idea and get feedback on it. So rather than kind of just sitting in a darkened room and developing something that you think is amazing and you kind of launch it and it falls flat, and we've all got examples of that throughout our careers. I'm sure I know I've got some. Just getting out there really quick and dirty and saying, here's an idea, how's it landing with people? Could this work? And again, got some real life examples of actual prototyping we've done with clients around different opportunities or problems they've been trying to solve. So again, we've got some really great tools to help you to prototype, because there are lots of different ways you can prototype, and we've got some great tools that can help you to do that. But anything to add to that before we go to questions?
Yeah, I think that can be an allergic reaction to the concept of prototyping for organizations. We're used to everything having to be perfect. We can't possibly put anything out unless it's perfect. And I think the pandemic has actually changed that for so many comms teams that I'm talking to have by necessity have to reduce, there's not their standards, but they've had to be comfortable putting things out that are a little less polished. And actually, this is a great stepping stone into prototyping, to sort of see some of that necessity and build it into this new way of working.
Thank you. Right, I'm going to stop sharing and ask if you've got any questions, because I'm mindful that you've gone through a lot of stuff there. So any questions from the floor? Anyone want to unmute and ask some questions?
We have got a couple of questions in the chat, Emma. So I'll read those out. So first of all, how do you identify the journey holistically when their journey has many touch points across the organisation, for example, HR?
Yeah, it's a good one. Go on, B, I'll let you.
I think, Sophia, I hope this is addressing the question that you're asking. I think for me, there's two elements to this. One, which is you can map the entire journey. Of course you can, but it's going to reveal a different set of information than if you're mapping a very specific journey. For instance, the journey back to the workplace from maternity leave, for example, just throw that one in there. So I think the first thing is to be really cognizant of what it is that you're trying to map and focus really explicitly on that. And also to say that mapping a journey is actually function agnostic. It's about the experience of that person. So yes, it might have, of course, it necessarily will have multiple touch points, and some might be HR and some might be more, but that's part of the thing that you're interested in, is actually what are they seeking to do, how are they doing it, and what is their experience of doing it, and how could it be better? So it's actually welcoming as many of those touch points as possible, but starting off with being really clear what you're trying to map so it is manageable for you.
Yeah, and we've got I didn't share it today, but we've got a nice little sort of tool that helps you to kind of take what could be a really overwhelming kind of problem to solve around where do I start, because surely everything that happens in an organization is an experience, and there's so many different communication experiences. And we look at kind of what we call nested journeys. So we look at the overall journey at a high level. You've probably pretty much got that nailed with your strategy. What's the overall experience for people to have when it comes to communication. And then we look at kind of what sits underneath that, and we go through a process of helping you to analyze whether it's really good, great, don't need to focus on it, whether it's not so great. And actually that's also something that's really important to the end user, the people we're working with. It's a moment that matters for them, right? We've got to focus on that, just as an example. So there's kind of quite a neat process to kind of take the overwhelming kind of ball the ocean nature of this and just really chunk it up as something that's much more workable.
There's a nice comment here from Matthew Hall, just to say, anyone who is facing resistance to prototyping, just say it's agile and then that resistance will melt away.
Love that. Great comment. Great.
Cool. And actually one of the challenges with design thinking, it's got lots of buzzwords that people really get a little bit nauseous around. I mean, even the word ideation, we've sort of fought over this for a long time. Actually, we've come to embrace it because it does what it says on the tin. But yeah, absolutely, don't call it design thinking, call it whatever works for you. Somebody I know who does this for a living inside a large organization says they're in the problem definition business. So just use the language. But yeah, if agile works, call it agile.
Got any other questions, Katie?
Yeah, another question here from John. Could the empathy map help define the persona in more depth, or does the persona always come first and is then applied to the empathy map?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of both, actually, John. I think again, this isn't an exact science, and as Beast at the beginning, we've got a lot of tools we use with people, and you take them and you use them in a way that works for you. So yeah, you start with the persona, of course you do, but then once you start to go into the empathy mapping space, then you might go back and revisit the persona and say, actually, we kind of got that wasn't quite right, or that, we got that a little bit wrong. So it's just whatever works for you, really. Bea, I'm sure you've got some thoughts on that.
I was just going to say almost word for word what you said. Yes, it's an iterative process. Yeah, I won't build on that.
These tools are there to help you. Quite often when we first start working with organizations on personas and empathy maps, they kind of get themselves a little bit tangled up in how to do it properly and what these are there for. And we just always take a step back and sort of say they're there as a thinking tool to get you in the habit of considering the end user, considering the person you're designing for. That's what they're there for, really. And yes, there's insights, and you're going to use those insights, but we're not talking about launching £1 million products to customers here. That's a different kind of field. We're talking about something quite different internally. So it's really about using them in a way that works for you to help you really get into the empathy piece. Any other questions?
Yeah, we've got a few more coming through, so we'll try and get through them. So we've tried to do personas in the past, but it's never really worked. We plan to try again this year, and if we want to build something useful, where do you suggest we start?
Do you want to start with that one, Bea, and I'll jump in?
Yeah, we come across this all the time. For the persona pool party issue, there's too many and they get out of control, or there's too many different parts of the organization and they sort of all die off. So I think for me, sorry, this is such an obvious answer, but for me, the starting point is knowing why you're doing it and knowing how you're going to start using them. So don't create them and then hope that you find a use for them. Create them and have a very immediate application for them, and actually using them may help you iterate them anyway. So know that they're not going to be fixed, and that you know how you're going to use them, how you're going to apply them.
Yeah. And it's really about gathering that insight piece, and it doesn't have to be all quantitative stuff. It can be, lots of qualitative as well. And what we find works really well for us is that, we'll work with companies to develop personas, and we'll just get in a virtual room and just kick around some of the assumptions and ideas. And it's never a straightforward process. There's a lot of back and forth and a lot of discussion, because people have different views and assumptions and biases about the data that you're talking through. But that's what's great about data, because it's facts. We talk about the facts, the clues, the hunches, the themes. So the clues are the facts, the stuff that we know to be true. The hunches are then when we bring our own perspective. Well, why are we seeing that? Why are all those people over there not interested in our purpose and our values? What's going on there? And we try and figure out what's happening there. So we kind of start with the data, the facts, the clues, and then we kind of bring in our hunches and themes, and we go through an iterative process, as Bea said, to really kind of kick that around and end up with workable set of personas. And they're never ever going to be something that everybody 100% agrees with. People always have a view, but they are going to be good enough to allow you to use them as a thinking tool, as I say, to empathize with your end user. Any other questions,
more?
please? Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, there's a couple of questions that are very similar, so I'll try and group them together. So you said that personas aren't about stereotyping. How can you avoid that? Isn't it impossible not to generalize? How does it differ by segmenting by audience and their needs and wants? And there's another question that kind of goes alongside that. How many personas do you develop? Where do you draw the line, and how do you kind of stop it being by role, or how do you choose what direction to take it? Because there's various different ways you can take your personas.
Emma, why don't you take the first bit and I'll take the second bit?
Yeah, so I had a really interesting conversation with somebody just this week actually about personas, and they were really anti, because they're like, no, in terms of diversity and inclusion, all you're doing is putting people in boxes, just stereotyping. But I'm like, no, it's actually the opposite is true. What you're trying to do is genuinely put yourself in the shoes and think about how the world is experienced for people that aren't you, which is what really we're talking about when it comes to diversity and inclusion. It's like, just start to understand where other people are coming from and try to kind of get yourself into their space a bit more. In an ideal world, would we need 6 personas? No, we wouldn't. In an ideal world, we'd have hyper personalization. We'd be able to kind of, it would be a conversation one-on-one, but we're not there yet. So for me, it's a really pragmatic step. Because at the moment, what we've got in many organizations is a one-size-fits-all approach. There might be a little bit of tweaking in terms of, well, they're not online, so we have to do something different for them. But mostly it's like, we just do the same thing to most people. Maybe treat managers a little bit differently, and that'll be it. For me, personas is about using that data and insight to help you start to consider how things might feel for the end user. And yeah, they're not going to cover everybody, because I think we often say ideally no more than sort of 6, but we'll go up to about 8, because they're not usable if you've got any more than that, because we don't have the time to be, segmenting to all these different sorts of people. But they certainly take you. It's a really, really good first step into thinking how different people experience the organization, experience communication. So they're not about stereotyping at all. They're about helping you to think differently outside of your own biases. So you might go, I hate email, but the data shows you that those people over there, they love it. They think it's great. So, it just really challenges your assumptions.
Thank you. And I think, Kate, and I think there was another question about how many do you have, and is it difficult? You quickly get overwhelmed, and we hear this a lot. Having spoken to a large number of organisations about this as part of the research for the book that Emma and I have been just finished, what tends to work best is when you've got a high level, a small number of high level personas. And I always come back to, I don't know if you remember, sort of back in bygone days when we were all kids, that you had these colouring books and you could cut out clothes and they had little tabs and you put them on the doll, and then you could take those clothes off again. For me, personas are a little bit like that. What you need is a high level set, 6, 8, probably not much more than that, and that they can then be dressed up for a specific application or for a specific project or program, and then sort of undressed and put back in the box or kept back on the shelf, whatever it is. Just what I mean? So you can add the level of detail to the persona as required by the piece of work that you're doing, and that enables you to still keep a manageable set. And this is what I've seen happen time and time again, including with global organizations, where those that sort of headline set get personalized by locality, if you like, as well as by project.
Thanks, Bea. I'm really mindful of time, guys, and I'm sorry we've not been able to get through all your questions, but we've got a 2 o'clock finish. So I'm just going to share the screen for the last time. While I'm doing that, I'm going to say a massive thank you to you all for coming along today. It's been a really interesting conversation. Hopefully, interesting conversation. I'm not sure it's been much of a conversation, been talking at you, but hopefully you found it interesting. If you're interested in this framework we've shared and finding out more, we have got some workshops we're running, 3rd of Feb and March, workshops to go into this in a lot more detail, to share these tools with you. You'll get a toolkit off the back of it. We've got an early bird discount. Katie, remind me of the details. People sign up by...
Anybody that signed up today through Eventbrite, will be sending out the link so you can get in nice and easily, but we'll also give you a discount code for anybody that joined via the call today, the webinar today, for 10% off as well.
And we'll be sharing the slides and all that good stuff as well. The other thing that we've been doing a lot of, so we've put together these public courses because people have asked us to, but the main thing that we've tended to be doing over the last sort of few years is work with in-house teams on what's called our IC by design approach. And that looks like, typically we tend to do sort of three sets of workshops, 2 3-hour workshops and an hour workshop, and it goes into a lot more detail around the framework and tools we've used, and we get to a kind of real live problem / opportunity that you've identified as a team, so you get to actually try out the tools and use them and work on them, and then take them away and continue to use them. So we do that as well. We've also going to be launching a persona workshop soon as well, because we know there's so much interest in this area, and not everybody has got the budgets to bring people like us or anyone else in to do that for them, or they might say, actually, we want to do it ourselves, and that's great, you know. So we're also going to be launching some info on that as well. So we'll send you all of this in a follow-up. I would just like to finish up, it's bang on 2, by saying massive thank you to Niall for joining us today. Really appreciate you coming along and sharing your views.
You're welcome.
And cheers, Niall. And just massive thank you to all for showing interest in this topic. We would love to continue the conversation, so we will be doing more. So keep in touch. Enjoy the rest of your Friday and have a great weekend. And we will look forward to hopefully catching up with you soon. So thank you very much and enjoy your Friday.